Hey, it's Ryan.
How's it going? This is Sean.
Sean Kowalski. So this is the second part of a podcast or vlog or whatever this is. We're doing on the topic of why am I not getting paid more, right? So why are you not making enough money? Why is it harder and harder to pay the bills? And we pushed that out there and got some amazing responses. Like I got a response from a friend of mine. I call him Kay. Kay had some really insightful stuff to say. Kay, and this dude is really smart, and I was like, okay, we should probably circle back on the topic and address it. And we really didn't feel like we finished it anyway. We kind of like cut it off, and it's a huge topic. So we just kind of want to make it into chunks and see if we can kind of make it relatable. So let's quickly summarize what we talked about in the first part in case you didn't see it. You should check it out, but if you didn't see it, this is what we talked about. So
yeah, this is a really dense topic to begin with, like Ryan said. So we're gonna try and I'm gonna try and do a breakdown, because essentially we had like 5 points that we approached in different ways, but essentially these are the 5. So what the causes of wage stagnation, which we talked about last time, pretty much broke down into the abandonment of full employment, which was one policy that the United States tried to push through in like the 80s and 90s, and that kind of like fell through the wayside in recent decades. Next point that we were talking about was the declining union density, so people not participating in unions in whatever industry they worked in. And point 3 was how our policymakers essentially were making these kinds of loose, not so good, poor labor decisions in terms of market policies and business practices and how they were approaching that. And that kind of was not adjusting to things like inflation and price changes and all of that. And then 4 point was the idea of CEO and higher level managers getting compensated so much, and there's really no like redistribution of that money that's coming into these massive companies. And these lower level people are not getting paid as much. And then the 5th point that we made was we talked about globalization and the international labor market and how the US is supposed to approach that, and like what's the best course of actions and how we can get the most out of our labor market and make it competitive with everything else that's going on in the world.
Right.
So that's the quickest breakdown we could do from the last video. Exactly, and that kind of shows how much it is, but that was the 1-2 punch of everything that we just trying to throw in that last video.
Right. Yeah.
It's funny. It's like that we're just trying to expect people to be like, okay, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4. Okay, but yeah. So I guess what we're going to kind of transition into is like what's the kind of the takeaway that we can take from all those points and condense into one thing and one like main principle, one main question.
Well, I mean, but just yesterday, part 1, we got it down to basically three pieces of advice, right? So we had the discussion and tried to turn it into 3 things that were actionable. So the first one came out to basically control your career and salary. You have to be an active participant in it and driving what happens with your current employer. 2 is if that doesn't work, if it's not working for you, if it's not working for other high performers in the business you're in, regardless of what it is, you have to consider a career change to either a different company or a slightly different sector. And if you're going to do that, you have to look for higher ground, meaning you have to look for companies that are growing in this like modern day situation and are likely to continue growing. So those are the 3 things we came out with. Today, we're going to respond to some of Keenan's thoughts. And Keenan made a really, really important point, which is subtle and kind of controversial. So he basically said, I said his name, I wasn't going to say it, but basically, so Kay made the point, he's like, the vlog was fine, the points you're making are fine, and it was like an interesting topic, and it's good to talk about it, without talking too much about technology, but he's like, this is affected a lot by technology. And the point made, and I've heard this point made a lot in San Francisco and Silicon Valley and pretty much anywhere where there's techno-optimists. And the point is, because of technology, things have gotten so much cheaper. Okay? So, if you make the same $20,000 as you did in 1995, 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2017, you're still making $20,000. You shouldn't care, because the things you can buy with that $20,000 are so much more, right? And we were just talking about this. So like 30 years ago, if you wanted a really good espresso, like you had to go to Europe, right? Now you can get it, you know, the equivalent roughly. Don't flame me for this on Twitter. Roughly, you know, at Starbucks, or you can get sort of this cheap luxury type of experience. Similar, like if you wanna experience what it's like to have a private limousine, you can use Uber. There's like a million examples, right? So, but the thing I was saying about that is people don't like hearing that. On average, I think average Americans don't really appreciate that point because it's, you know, nobody wants to accept that, right? Yeah. And they know that the top, what we were saying about the CEO compensation and like the rich getting richer, is those dollar amounts of people at the top are continuing to rise. So it's like, well, why? I don't care if I can get a latte. Like, I want my dollar amount to rise, right? Mm-hmm. And Keenan's like, you know, the point he's trying to make is that you can basically, you should be comfortable. You should appreciate what you have. Yeah. And I've gone through this thought process a lot, so we just kind of wanted to expand on that. And the question is, like, is it okay to make less because things are cheaper?
Yeah. And I think that's the one thing that's kind of interesting, because when you bring up something like that, it inherently kind of brings up the idea of like inequality, and like there's a difference between the people that are kind of struggling to get by in the working class America and the people who are like really being successful and at the top of their game and making a lot of money in terms of just like straight up number figures.
Okay.
But when you look at this comparatively too, and you think about it in the situation that we're thinking about right now in this kind of framework and this kind of scope, if everything is cheaper, then all that does is it essentially knocks the brackets kind of makes them not as important anymore. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. Because if originally what we think of the poverty line in the U.S. right now, I think it's like $17,000 is like what people think. It's like $17K, that's the poverty line. Anything less than that, poverty line. Like you're struggling. Like it's not going to be easy for you to live. But if the cost of living on its average, no matter where you are in the country, continues to drop, and because of these like new technologies that come out and this facilitated lifestyle that everyone's kind of getting access to, all that kind of does is it brings people up in the same way that kind of money does, that increasing wages would. Because the access to things that used to be considered luxury or high-end or anything like that is increasingly becoming more popular with people who don't necessarily wouldn't have been able to afford it maybe even 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
So that in of itself is kind of acting, technology in this case, in many cases, is acting like an equalizer in many ways.
Right.
So in many ways you can kind of say maybe it is kind of okay that people are making less because everyone's getting more access to things that they previously wouldn't have even had an opportunity to beforehand. So
yeah, and I think that's comforting up until the point that we look at what is still expensive.
Exactly.
And this is something I before I was doing this project, before I wrote software, I worked in medical technology for a long time. And one of the things we see there is the whole business model relies on basically on the United States government spending more money on healthcare.
Yeah.
Right. Healthcare, without getting the numbers are very boring, but like the United States spends so much money on healthcare.
Like the most in the world of anybody. We spend the most money on healthcare by far compared to almost every other competitor. But the thing is, when you look at it, the figures are that almost everyone below us in spending has pretty much completely universal healthcare, and it's high quality healthcare. Just as it's debatable because people still say that healthcare in the United States is still probably the best in the world, but you're paying at a higher price for it. So it's like, how do we maximize that efficiency is one of the, and that's a whole can of worms that you can make an entire podcast out of that one question alone.
Yeah, that's a whole career. But and you and I differ slightly on this.
Yeah.
Because I tend to think, and having worked inside healthcare, I tend to think part of the problem is like basically the reliance on the federal government.
Yeah.
Not to sound completely libertarian, like I don't think it should be a completely free market, but I think there's a lot of controls and a lot of them drive costs. But the point of this statement is inflation. So when things feel more expensive, inflation is about 90% driven by what we might call like slow change industries. Healthcare and education are the two big ones. So the reason Keenan is, I meant not to say his name. Keenan is both right and wrong is the wrong part is that the things that are driving inflation have not gotten cheaper because of technology.
Yeah.
And if anything, they're growing like absurdly fast. Both education and healthcare, are growing at like 10, 12, 30%. I don't know the exact number. And, Apprentice Co. is a lot about non-traditional applicants to jobs, because we see such a huge opportunity to do practical skills training as a bypass of that paying for what is like a poorly way too expensive product in the form of education, and similarly in healthcare. And I think that's kind of the problem, right? Is we need all this like frivolity is
like
the so much availability of cheap luxury goods. We need that to cross over into education and healthcare. And like, oh, by the way, like education and healthcare are things you really, really need.
Yeah, like
right?
It's one of those things, like it's hard to believe that two things that we consider two of the most important aspects of like what makes up, like, people see America as great because we used to have fantastic educational system and a really good healthcare system, but as time has progressed, especially over the past couple of decades, we've really fallen behind in a lot of ways. Especially when you look at education. I mean, when it comes to the traditional rankings and the way that we look at it now, it's all of these Scandinavian countries that are dominating it because they have really, really innovative techniques that are teaching kids cutting edge kinds of, whether it's technologies, whether it's completely computerized, whether it's stuff that's new classroom environments. The way that they're evolving is essentially allowing them to drive down costs too, because people don't have to pay you. It's a universal education essentially. You can go from kindergarten all the way through university and pay not even a dime essentially. All you have to do is pay for like your books and everything, and and then all of a sudden you're on your path to your career. Whereas there's a lot of roadblocks in the U.S. in order to get that kind of like really high level and really high tech education in the United States.
So maybe that's the first point is it's good and bad, right? So your wage not increasing is not a problem for certain types of goods because they've gotten so cheap. But maybe the second point is like I would rather have a higher income in healthcare rather than a cheap latte. I was gonna say like cheap latte doesn't make up for expensive healthcare.
No.
Right. Cheap limousine doesn't make up for expensive education.
No.
Right. So that's kind of the second point, I think, is like it's not. He's right. Our friend's right. Kay's right. But we have to look at the problem holistically. Like we can't get too excited about $50 smartphones if 80% of what I don't know the numbers. So if you're just stressed out because of healthcare and education, right?
There has to be a way to there's some kind of transferable technique that is working so well in all of these other markets that's not translating well into the education and healthcare.
Right.
There has to be, whether it's, there's a lot of different aspects that come in, especially healthcare, when it has like the subsidies and everything and all these different kinds of things that are essentially are protectionist in many ways. And it's so, like you said, so intertwined with how policymakers have written it. Right. But there has to be some way to maximize what we have so that efficiency is really, so like is one thing that we talked about that I don't think we brought up yet was the idea of there's certain industries, specifically healthcare and education, that have focused much more on productivity rather than efficiency. And that already kind of creates a problem, because if you're just trying to put out a lot, and if that's your main focus, then
please send all hate mail to physicians and hospital administrators to Sean.
So if you're putting such a heavy drive on that, then essentially that could be a really obvious cause for increased costs.
Okay.
Because you're not.
But there was something really. There's a really big observation in there that we didn't really make clear, which is that it's the United States federal government has designed. I know more about healthcare, so I'm going to speak to healthcare.
Go ahead.
Has designed healthcare to create this problem. Okay, like 20%. Every $1 in $5 you earn goes to pay for healthcare. and it's roughly a bad deal. I'm comfortable saying it's a bad deal. I don't think that's a controversial statement.
I don't think that is. I think most people probably agree with that.
Yeah, so it's not a fun topic either, by the way, but
because you also don't want to be critical of people who work in healthcare, because most people who work in healthcare kind of have like a benevolent view of it. You know what I mean? They're not doing I wouldn't say that most people who have worked as doctors and physicians are like, I'm here to make money, I don't really care about saving people's lives. Like there's still a very strong like they take like the Hippocratic Oath and everything. Like they literally are there to provide a service and protect people and save lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's still there's kind of like a sacred ground to it too. So it's like that's why we're like kind of treading lightly and saying things and criticizing the way the system is currently set up, because this isn't an attack on doctors, because I have a family of doctors. I have MDs in my family, and I would never want people to think that I'm attacking these people. But what it comes down to it is that maybe there is a way to approach this problem so that efficiency becomes the key aspect of it, not productivity.
Yeah, and for sure a lot of people are working on that.
Yeah.
But I guess the central question is, why am I not getting paid enough? And the answer is partially because incentive system, like the way policy is designed, is driving the cost of these things that technology can't help.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So technology helps a lot of things, smartphones, Uber, anytime we get like a lot of scale, right? Like whatever it is, then scale meaning like lots of people, zillions of people use it, not just, a few thousand or whatever.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, computers, everything, all consumer electronics, televisions, LCD screens, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that stuff doesn't have the same benefits or the same problems as healthcare, right? So the reason I'm not getting paid enough is because things I critically need, like healthcare and education, are not getting cheaper.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting point. Like it is both right and wrong. Like the economy is really big. All the money we spend, all the different things we buy, like it's a really big basket of things, and part of them are doing, are getting better as time goes on. Mm-hmm. But these other things we rely on a lot are getting worse as time goes on. Yeah.
Or it's not even. I wouldn't even say getting worse might not be the best way to say it, because it's just their growth is so limited that it almost seems like they're getting worse, because it's like when you look at the growth patterns of all these other things and how you can see that the really like clear steps of like how we went from like pretty like adequate like taxi services to like a really simplistic way of using like something like Uber, and that was something that came up pretty quickly. It was Uber was not one of the, I wouldn't have said, and people probably wouldn't have agreed in the 1990s, that you could have immediately pulled up some device and immediately had a taxi or a car there to pick you up and take you wherever you wanted to go. Mm-hmm. The progression was incredibly fast. It was exponential even. And then when you look at something like education and healthcare, I mean, when you think about, I think education is one that's really easy to see even nowadays, is like when you walk into a classroom of a public high school in Pennsylvania nowadays, it's not that drastically different from how it was in the 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. And like, you can tell if you look on a city street nowadays in New York, there's a pretty big difference between the 60s and 70s between nowadays, because especially if you pull up the Uber app in a major city, it is crazy how many cars. You literally can get a car in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that. Like there's a difference in the progression style and the progression, I guess, intensity in some things, and especially the consumer products, and how it's not really kind of transferred into these things like education and healthcare.
Right. But when it comes to the how much am I getting paid, the balance of my pocketbook. Yeah. I feel like, cool, I can get a latte, I can get a cheap flat screen TV. However, my life is still kind of hard, because the stuff I really need to feel safe, right? It's a lot about safety, like, and healthcare and education are those things that make you feel secure in life. Mm-hmm. So security is still expensive. Yeah.
So then I guess what we're getting at is like, what's that solution? Like, what do we think is like the next step to like, if the idea that we put at hand is present, so if everything is getting cheaper but people aren't getting paid more, what can someone do to get themselves out of that problem?
Right.
And the one thing that we talked about pretty extensively recently is stuff like growth industries. Industries that are on these really, really aggressive exponential growth cycles that are allowing people to be very mobile, move up a lot, and make a lot of money in a time span that they wouldn't have been able to make it before.
Right. So if you want the number of dollars you make in a year to go up. So if Keenan's observation doesn't come for you.
Yeah.
Right. So cheap lattes, cheap TVs, whatever, that doesn't make you feel secure. Then you have to aim for the higher dollar amount. And the higher dollar amount is where?
Is in these growth industries, is in these places where we can find, so I guess we'll try to pin a couple down. Places that we think that would be somewhere for people to go and have an opportunity to move upward and do something new.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, we talk about it a lot as something like a startup company where people have an opportunity to come on immediately, have autonomy, and make decisions and be part of something at the same time.
What does that mean? Why does that matter? I think that's kind of insider jargon. Like
yeah.
So what does that mean?
All right. So I guess part of I'll kind of give like an anecdotal kind of response to this. So like when I was still at school finishing up my semester this past spring, one of the things that came was I was contacted by Nick, by Ryan's cousin who's working with us, and was like, listen, like my cousin needs some help with the company that he's starting, and he would love to talk to you about what the prospects of it all is. And I was like, oh, like I was still like pondering what I wanted to do for an internship and what I wanted to do for like my summer. And I was like, you know what, like the idea of working for a startup is one of these things that I've always really had a lot of interest in, and like it's something that I think provides a lot of value for your career and kind of teaches you how to work in an environment that's growing and expanding really fast.
Right.
And I think what really drove it home is the first time that me and you talked, and we really, really sat down and we both critically thought, and you really explained and brought everything to my attention about what you wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Now, and you pretty much told me like I could create my position and do what I wanted to do based on what you had in place.
Right.
And being able to create your own role and kind of create your own destiny is something that Americans can get behind. Like I feel like that's something that people identify with really strongly. And essentially, if you get into an industry, specifically in some things like tech specifically, it provides you a platform to do something that people don't really normally have the chance to do.
That's true. As Sean is doing such a good job of describing my sales pitch to him, I'm thinking like, yeah, but tech is hella risky.
It is. It's risky, but
people like security, you know, and people like 9 to 5, 3% raise every year, pension, 401k retirement, you know, that sort of thing. So
some people, but see, maybe that's a generational thing. Like I would say that there's probably a lot of kids in my generation that are probably willing to take that risk nowadays, because the idea of working not even 9 to 5, some of the positions when you're working early on now, especially in things like finance, you're working unbelievable work hour weeks where it's like almost 50 to 60 hours a week, and it's like, how is that fun? How is that one even somewhat productive? And like, how do you feel, how's that fulfilling? Whereas you could be doing something that not only do you feel like you have control over your own destiny, but like you feel like you're enjoying yourself.
Check out the internship page at apprenticego.com.
Yeah.
No, I think it's right. Like obviously I'm in favor of it, but I think I've also struggled with it. Like the company I just worked at was struggling to find, you know, a business model that brought in a lot of cash, and even the weeks when we had like 50, 60 hour weeks, that wasn't the part that was kind of like the burnout. The burnout was the emotional, like,
roller coaster.
Yeah, roller coaster. It's like, what is going on? Like, how invested do I feel in this? You know, other people are nervous. Other people are, you know, where's the sense of security about that? And I think that's really, it's a bummer. Like we always talk about this place we're in, which is an old Mack truck factory. And if you don't know Mack trucks, it's I don't know where they are, like if they're the number 1 or 5, but it's probably like a top 3, or at least definitely top 5 manufacturer.
I think Mack's owned by Volvo now too.
That's owned by Volvo. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, so it's like an important, big important company, and like provided a lot of security. My grandfather actually worked in this building, and that's very cool. But like that is completely opposite of what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that with my, why am I not getting paid enough? And where's my security? That doesn't feel like an answer. Startups don't feel like an answer.
Yeah.
And I think I have a lot of empathy for that. It makes me kind of sad, but I also agree that I think, and this is kind of maybe the final point we want to make here, which is, I think the lesson of like part one of this, why am I not getting paid enough, and then Keenan's observation is, either settle or look for growth.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think morally speaking, I don't think there's a problem with either one.
No, I don't think there really is either. And I think the one thing that's really interesting about it is that you really, with the observations that we've made at hand, especially the idea of costs of living going down, you really can't go wrong with either. Because if you really do take the risks and you try and shoot for growth, and you land on your feet, you're going to be in a great position. But at the same time, if you choose to settle because of this hypothesis that everything is going down in price and you could live happily off of that, then you're going to be just fine too. So, optimistic viewpoints here. So,
okay, so let's wrap it up. So basically, yesterday, we talked about these 4 or 5 factors that went into like why it feels like we're not getting paid enough. So that's in part one. We're not going to reiterate that. The lessons we took out of that is, you have to control your career, consider career change if it's not working within your current company, and then if you do a career change, or if you just change companies, you got to look for higher ground. And then the point is, the observation that, well, maybe you don't need to look for higher ground because things are actually getting cheaper, is kind of like mixed, right?
Yeah.
So you probably should make like a conscious choice. Like if you're not gonna shoot for the stuff that's growing, then you should prepare yourself mentally so it doesn't feel like a bummer, right?
No.
And embrace it. And I see this a lot too. Like it's like if you watch YouTube, there's like so many videos about minimalism and like van life, people living in vans. People,
those guys seem pretty happy, man.
So I think it's a cool movement. I think as a millennial, sometimes I'm a little like pissed off and skeptical because I'm like, oh, we're not making as much money, so like there's like this cultural reinforcement, like we should settle for less, but that's that's BS or whatever.
Yeah.
But if Keenan's right, maybe it's not that big a deal.
Yeah. It might not be. And that's one of those things. One of those prospects we have to keep on the horizon and be very aware of, so that whatever decision you end up making, whether it comes down to the settle growth decision, that you're happy with the decision that you made, and then I think that's an important takeaway to have. So
cool.
All right. So this is Francisco, and this is American Hustle signing out.
See ya.
See ya.